Sometimes you don't realize how important music is in a game until it's gone. You can have incredible graphics, detailed environments, and solid gameplay, but without the right sound, something just feels off. There's no tension, no weight, no atmosphere. And then there are games where the music doesn't just support the experience, it defines it. That's exactly what's happening with Resident Evil Requiem. Even early on, even before people fully break the game down, one thing becomes clear almost immediately. The music stands out, not in a loud, obvious way, but in a subtle, almost psychological way. It builds tension when nothing else is happening. It makes quiet moments feel uncomfortable. It turns simple exploration into something that feels unpredictable. And somehow, it manages to feel modern while still staying true to what makes Resident Evil. So the question is, why does it work so well? To understand that, we need to look at a few things. The people behind the music, how it's used inside the game, what influences it pulls from, and finally, how it actually works on a technical level. Because this isn't just good music, it's carefully designed tension. And hey, before this video continues, I just want to say I'm not going to be talking about any game spoilers or anything. However, there is going to be gameplay on the screen, but it's all from some of the early parts of the game. So if you don't want any spoilers at all of the early parts of the game, look away. If not, enjoy the rest of the video. Before we really get into the music, it's important to quickly talk about the game itself, because the way a game sounds is always connected to what the game is trying to be. Resident Evil 9 continues the direction that the series has been building towards over the past several entries, a mix of survival horror, exploration, and narrative-driven gameplay. But what really defines Resident Evil as a series isn't just the enemies or the story, it's the atmosphere, that constant feeling that something is wrong, that something could happen at any moment. And that's where music becomes incredibly important. Because in a horror game, you're not just reacting to what's happening on screen, you're reacting to what you think might happen next. And Resident Evil 9 leans heavily into that idea. It's not just about action, it's about tension, pacing, uncertainty, the kind of experience where even walking through an empty room can feel stressful. And for that kind of experience to work, the sound design has to be perfect. One of the key composers associated with the game is Neo Sato, and understanding his style helps explain a lot about why the music feels the way it does. Because instead of focusing on traditional memorable melodies, his work leans much more into atmospheres, into tensions, into sounds that feel like it exists as part of the world, rather than something layered on top of it. And that's a huge difference. In a lot of games, music is there to be noticed. It tells you how to feel. It swells during big moments. It fades during quiet ones. But in Resident Evil, and especially here, the goal is different. The music isn't trying to stand out. It's trying to blend in, to become part of the environment. And that's where Neo Sato's approach works so well. His compositions often rely on subtle textures, unsettling tones, slow builds instead of sudden changes. It's not about giving you something catchy, it's about giving you something uncomfortable. Something that sits in the background and slowly builds tension without you even realizing it. And that style fits perfectly with what Resident Evil is trying to do. Because the series has never just been about action, it's about unease. It's about the feeling that something isn't right. And when the music is designed this way, it doesn't just support that feeling, it creates it. Even though a full team is always involved in a project like this, having a strong composer like Neo Sato helps give the soundtrack a consistent identity, a direction, purpose. And once you start paying attention to it, you realize that music isn't just here to sound good, it's there to control how you experience the game. Inside the game, the music doesn't behave like traditional music. A lot of the time, it barely feels like music at all. There aren't constant melodies or big themes playing in the background. Instead, you get subtle layers. Low ambient drones, distant echoes, quiet, almost unnoticeable tones. And what that does is create a constant sense of unease. You're never fully comfortable. Even when nothing is happening, you'll be walking through an empty hallway. Nothing around you, no enemies, and yet something feels off. Like the game is warning you, or maybe tricking you. And that's where Resident Evil's music really shines. It doesn't just react to danger, it creates the expectation of danger. There are moments where nothing happens at all, but the music makes it feel like something should. So you slow down, you check corners, and you hesitate. And sometimes nothing happens, which somehow makes it worse. Because now you don't trust the game anymore. And when something finally does happen, the music shifts. It becomes more aggressive, more layered, more intense, but it never feels over the top. It stays grounded, controlled, which keeps everything feeling real instead of cinematic. What makes the music even more interesting is how much it pulls from outside of gaming. A lot of its style is influenced by modern horror films, not the kind that rely on loud orchestras or jump scare stings, but the kind that builds tension through atmosphere, through sound design, through discomfort. Instead of clear melodies, you'll get evolving textures, unstable tones, sounds that feel like they're constantly shifting. There's also a strong influence from electronic and experimental music. You'll hear synthetic sounds that feel cold, mechanical, and unnatural. And that fits perfectly with Resident Evil's theme, where technology, biology, and horror are constantly blending together. At times, the music feels less like a soundtrack and more like part of the environment. The world itself is making noise, and that makes everything feel more immersive. Up to this point, we've talked about the composer, the atmosphere, and how the music works inside and outside the game. But that still doesn't fully explain why it works, because none of this is accidental. The tension you feel, the uneasiness, the way even quiet moments feel uncomfortable. That all comes down to how the music is actually constructed. Not just emotionally, but technically. And this is where things get really interesting. Because once you start breaking it down, you realize the music isn't just background sound, it's designed to mess with how your brain processes tension. One of the most important tools being used here is dissonance. In most music, notes are chosen to sound pleasant together. They resolve, they feel complete. Horror does the exact opposite. Resident Evil 9 constantly uses notes that feel slightly off, chords that don't resolve, tones that clash just enough to make you feel uncomfortable. Your brain hears it and immediately recognizes that something isn't right. Even if you don't constantly notice it, and that feeling sticks with you. Another key element is something called the tritone, often referred to as the devil's interval. It's a very unstable sound. It doesn't feel resolved, it creates tension naturally. And it shows up all over horror music, including Resident Evil. Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's buried deep in the background, but it's always doing the same thing, keeping you slightly on edge. Then there's minimalism. Instead of complex melodies, the music often relies on very simple sounds. A low hum, a single repeating note, a distant echo. And the simplicity isn't powerful because when there's less sound, every sound matters more. If you hear something small in silence, your brain immediately focuses on it. Now imagine that in a horror game. You hear something faint, you're not sure what it is, and suddenly you're paying attention to everything. Another major technique is dynamic layering. The music changes depending on what you're doing. When you're exploring, it stays quiet, minimum, almost unnoticeable. But as tension builds, new layers fade in. More sound, more pressure, more intensity. And when things go wrong, it all comes together. Faster, louder, and more chaotic. But that transition is smooth. It doesn't feel like a new song. It feels like the same sound evolving. Then there's obviously rhythm, but is it really obvious? No. Because in Resident Evil, there's a lack of it. Most music has a steady beat, something predictable, something you can follow. Resident Evil avoids that instead. You get irregular timing, unpredictable patterns, sometimes no rhythm at all. And that's unpredictably makes your brain uncomfortable because it can't find a pattern to latch onto. And at a certain point, the line between music and sound design completely disappears. You start hearing things that don't feel like music at all. Distorted sounds, mechanical noises, reversed audio, environmental textures. It all blends together. So instead of hearing a soundtrack, you feel like the world itself is making noise, like something is wrong with the environment. And then there's silence, or near silence, which might be the most powerful tool of all. Because when the music disappears, you start listening. Every footstep, every creak, every distant sound. Your brain fills in the gaps. You start imagining things, and that's where real horror comes from. And what makes all of this even more impressive is that most players will never consciously notice it. You're not thinking about music theory while playing a video game, you're just feeling something: tension, unease, suspicion. And that's what great game music does. It works in the background, shaping your experience without asking for attention. At the end of the day, what makes the music in Resident Evil 9 so effective isn't just how it sounds. It's how it makes you feel. It turns quiet moments into tense ones. It makes empty space feel dangerous. It keeps you on edge even when nothing is happening. Because horror isn't just about what the game shows you, it's about what makes you expect it. And the music is a huge part of that. It builds that expectation. It creates that tension. It makes you hesitant. And sometimes it makes you afraid of something that isn't even there. That's the power of great sound design. And once you start noticing it, you realize that some of the scariest parts of the game aren't where you see, they're what you hear. And with that, thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you did, make sure that like button greatly appreciated. And if you want to see more content like this, hit the subscribe button. It means a lot to me. We're so close to hitting 100 subscribers. It means a lot. So with that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.